I'm so delighted and honored to be here today. And by here, I of course mean in the packets arriving at your homes via the internet protocol that I have spent so much of my life studying. The first person I tried to teach about the internet was my grandmother, Sheila. She was a writer her whole life, but struggled in her 80s to figure out how to continue writing and publishing. So I made her a blog, blogginggrandma.com, and she slowly learned how to post on it such essays as, "Yes, I dare to eat a peach," and "86 in the city." But she never really understood how it worked, or even, I think, entirely believed that other people could see it. I once had dinner with her at my parents' apartment, and she was utterly astonished that I could load her email inbox on one of their computers. How did it get all the way over here from my computer, she wanted to know. Sheila died while I was in graduate school studying cybersecurity and internet policy. Even in the early 2000s, it was a relatively unusual thing to be studying, and it could take you in some strange directions. On more than one occasion, my graduate advisor suggested to me in absolute earnest that it might be helpful for me to spend some time playing World of Warcraft on one of his son's accounts so I could really understand how people developed and invested in anonymous online identities. Graduate school, as you all now know from firsthand experience, is a deeply serious endeavor. And for me, graduate school was largely about getting a handle on the protocols that underlie the internet. If you thought there was any chance that I wasn't going to use this as an opportunity to talk about how the internet works, then you've clearly never taken one of my classes. At its heart, the internet is a set of rules that we all agreed to for how to chop up and package and transport information. They're rules that were deliberately written to be flexible, so that they would work for a variety of different types of information, text, pictures, audio, video, and to handle multiple users and streams of information at once, so that instead of waiting for a family member to finish using the telephone before you could make a call, everyone in a household, or indeed a whole city, can be online simultaneously, their packets all intermingling on the network at the same time. Part of the challenge of trying to secure the internet is thinking about ways to restrict malicious online activity without interfering with that fundamental flexibility. And speaking of flexibility, I have been absolutely in awe of how calm, graceful, and tough all of you have been about the changing circumstances of your final semester at Fletcher, to say nothing of how kind you've been to your professors as we worked out the logistics of teaching on Zoom. I have drawn tremendous inspiration from watching all of you adapt, from your resilience, from the willingness of the students in my class on privacy in the digital age to join classes at all hours of the day and night in their respective time zones, to plan and execute multi-person in-class debates on Zoom, to engage in discussions about the ways that the world is changing around us and will need to be remade in the future. I've also been enormously inspired and supported by my colleagues at Fletcher on the staff and faculty, by how wonderful they've been about approaching this new challenge of shifting our classes online as a collective endeavor and an opportunity to try out new tools and approaches to teaching. Most of them do not study the internet, but have still been much braver than I when it comes to rethinking their virtual classrooms, in part because I myself am someone who really likes for things to go according to plan. In fact, one of the things I wrestled with in graduate school was figuring out how to do research that couldn't be planned all the way from beginning to end. In my third year, after I finished my general exams, I was trying to choose a dissertation topic and kept getting frustrated with my inability to figure out what I wanted to work on, and my advisor's insistence that I needed to spend more time thinking and reading and playing World of Warcraft before I decided. My father sent me an email during that period, telling me to do essentially all the same things as my advisor, minus the computer games, and saying, remember that you cannot lay the whole thing out in advance, exactly what you're going to read, write, and show. If you could do that, then the research wouldn't really be worth doing. Of course, some of the research I did in graduate school was just obviously worth doing, like the time I wrote a piece about a Russian cybercrime syndicate that distributed the CryptoLocker ransomware, and I was contacted by the writers of the television show The Good Wife, who were working on an episode about a ransomware attack, and wanted to learn more about how those schemes operated. Possibly the greatest accomplishment of my graduate career was the moment in that episode when a member of the law firm that's been attacked dials the ransomware helpline number flashing on their infected computer screens, and a man answers. "Thank you for calling the Trojan Lock Help Desk. We are currently busy helping other customers. Please have your routing number ready and you will be assisted in the order you called." Because that really does happen. Cyber crime requires a tremendous amount of both human and technical infrastructure, not just the encryption algorithms, the malware programs, but also the people who have to answer phones in case one of the attacker's unwitting victims can't figure out how to make a Bitcoin ransom payment. The kind of research I do is predicated on the idea that trying to make the internet more secure requires tackling both kinds of infrastructure. That cybersecurity is not just about science and technology, it is also about policy and people, precisely the things you have been studying at Fletcher. Now, no matter what you study, you may have second thoughts at moments. I remember very vividly my graduate school hooding ceremony, where the former astronaut Mike Massimino spoke. In addition to flying 2 missions to the Hubble telescope and completing 4 spacewalks, he was the first person to tweet from outer space and later played himself on the Big Bang Theory. And he spoke at my graduate school graduation about going for one of his first spacewalks and looking back at the Earth, seeing the curve of the planet, and thinking, people are not supposed to see this. This is too beautiful for human eyes. And there I was, sitting in the audience in these robes. I had just spent 5 years studying nothing but internet security, really committing to the idea that that was going to be what I worked on for the rest of my life. And I'm thinking, maybe I should have been an astronaut? But teaching graduate students, especially ones with as much professional experience and international perspective as all of you have, is its own kind of great privilege and challenge. I thought back to my advisor's suggestion that I spend some time with World of Warcraft this fall, when I took my Cyber in the Civil Sector class to see the movie War Games at the Brattle Theater in Harvard Square. War Games came out in 1983. It stars the young Matthew Broderick, who guesses the password for a server he thinks has a bunch of games on it, like computer chess. And then when he logs in, he chooses what he thinks is another cooler-sounding game called Global Thermonuclear War. And actually, as so often happens, the server turns out to belong to the North American Aerospace Defense Command and be capable of launching nuclear weapons. I took my class because it was famously one of Ronald Reagan's favorite movies. He watched it at Camp David the summer it came out, and then asked the chairman of the Joint Chiefs whether the scenario in the film could really happen. And the movie subsequently shaped a whole generation of American policymakers' perspectives on the threats presented by computers, profoundly influencing the anti-hacking law passed in the United States in the 1980s, to the point that a clip from the film was actually screened during a congressional hearing. Watching it with many of you at the Brattle in November, my first time seeing it on a big screen, hearing you laugh at the computers and politics and hairstyles of the 1980s, it felt right to be showing it to a new generation of policymakers, no longer as an instructional video about the risks of emerging technologies, but instead as a lesson in the complicated and sometimes haphazard ways that policy gets made and people try to imagine and protect themselves from the future. I wish we were celebrating your graduation today together in person in Medford, but at the same time, I am deeply moved by the idea that as you're watching this video is being chopped up into millions of packets with little headers affixed to each one, determined by rules dreamt up just decades ago to route them through the air and across undersea cables and up to satellites and over telephone wires and via cellular towers to your homes all over the world, where they are being reassembled, put into the right order to stream onto your devices in Singapore, California, India, Somerville, Switzerland. It makes me feel like people are not supposed to be able to do this. This is too beautiful. It reminds me how fast the world can change and what an enormous impact a small set of well-crafted rules can have. It makes me excited at the prospect of all the things you will go on to do, all the new rules you will write, that will no doubt seem as utterly incomprehensible to me, as much like magic as the internet seemed to my grandmother. You may not know yet how to do that, and that's okay. If you could plan it all out in advance, then it wouldn't be worth doing. Congratulations, class of 2020. I can't wait to see what you do next.